to the channel. This is the very first episode of the Comics Box Podcast. I'm Richard Cole, the Amari in Amari Communications. If you're a long-time listener or viewer of the channel, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you want to become a Patreon supporter, become a supporter, get early access to episodes like this one, as well as bonus content that will appear on the channel. Alright, so I've been wanting to do a show that focused on comic books and comic book movies for quite a long time. So I'm really excited to get this started, so let's dive right in. Today the topic is recasting T'Challa matters, and here's 5 reasons why. So I've enjoyed, Marvel comics probably since I was 4. I think that's the very first comic was the giant size Fantastic Four, which was a reprint of the first Fantastic Four annual. And from that point I was hooked, jumped off into Spider-Man and then of course Batman, Superman. But as I was getting deeper into Marvel Comics, the thing that I took notice of that was different from what DC had was, I can't remember who I encountered first in comics, where there was an issue of Captain America and the Falcon, or it may have been issue of the Avengers. I think some of the reprints of some of like the ones after Jack Kirby left drawing the series, but they were issues that had the Black Panther featured, and I mean that was inspiring. When you're 7, 8, 9 years old, it's inspiring to see your heroes, or you being reflected in comics. I know DC kind of later with Black Lightning and characters like that, and then in adulthood, I was in my 20s when the Milestone characters first launched within DC Comics. But like I said, just as a little kid, seeing characters like the Falcon, seeing Black Panther, like I said, it was very, very inspiring to see these characters in the pages of comic books. But the character of T'Challa, the Black Panther, was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. They debuted in issue number 52 of the Fantastic Four. And this was about, I think, a few months prior to the actual creation of the Black Panther Party. So I don't know if the name was inspired or if it was coincidental, but a lot of misconceptions is that the character of the Black Panther was taken from the Black Panthers. Within Marvel, the higher ups, they were probably a little concerned about the connection. So at one point they changed his costume a little bit, and I think they might have even tried to call him something else at one point. But the great thing about it is that they decided to keep T'Challa as the Black Panther. The representation of his character was more paramount than what some lost people thought about anything. Making crazy connections where they didn't need to be connected. But again, this is a character that was different. He wasn't a stereotype. He was a king of a great African civilization. They had advanced technology. That was definitely a first in comics, period. And again, it's very inspiring to see oh wow, while we've all probably dressed as Batman on Halloween or dressed as Superman on Halloween, to see a character like T'Challa, in the comics again, being representative of something to be proud of, like to aspire to be a tech genius, or aspire to just be a leader, maybe not leader of a country or anything like that, but I mean, well, we've had a black president, so to aspire to do great things, or just inspire something within yourself to be great in yourself, again, it was really great. um, from those initial appearances in the Fantastic Four, like I said, my first encounter with the character were in the pages of the Avengers. So, to see him being part of a team, to see, again, a master strategist, within the team, and like I said, not just being relegated to the sidelines, even his debut in Fantastic Four, it's like he's kicking the butts of the Fantastic Four, sizing them up so they could help him on a mission. That's a powerful debut. But as let's fast forward to the MCU. Back when they were starting with their Phase 1 and everything, and then there were rumors that it's possible, the Black Panther could appear in an MCU movie or get his own movie. It was a collective at large. There were a lot of people that were excited to see this happen. Within comic book fans, they were excited to see this character on screen for the first time. Prior to the creation of the MCU, or prior to the inception of Marvel Studios as we know it, at one point, Wesley Snipes had the rights to the character and was going to develop a Black Panther film or trilogy, right after he was done with Blade trilogy. But things happened, and ended up, I guess, losing some of his rights. I don't know if they bought him out or what the scenario was, but it did pave the way for the Black Panther to make his debut in Captain America Civil War. And again, the reaction was universal. Universal reaction. It was represented well. One of the best actors ever, Chadwick Boseman. I remember, seeing 40, in the movie 42, playing Jackie Robinson, and then from there, to play James Brown. I mean, I used to think that you could never do a James Brown biopic, because who would you get to play James Brown and not make it look like a caricature, or look goofy, or just miss the whole point of what James Brown was all about? Because it's almost like Elvis. Who would you have gotten to get to play Elvis without, like, oh, it's the silly jumpsuits, that type of thing. So, but a testament to his ability to play James Brown. I mean, and to capture the essence of the man, the human being, James Brown. That's a testament to his talent. So to be tapped to play such an iconic superhero, to me, it was a logical step. And I, for one, was, excited for his casting, and was, not sure what to expect out of the role, but I knew he was going to do a good job. But to say that was an understatement. Like I said, just that initial appearance in Civil War, it elevated the hype for his solo movie, and that solo movie, to gross $1 billion again, it was universal. It was universal. I remember, me and my wife went to go see that, and there were people, it was kind of like Michael Jackson's Thriller. People that didn't buy a pop record, let alone a record, bought Thriller. To me, people that probably wouldn't go see a Marvel movie, let alone a comic book movie, or hadn't been in the theater in God knows how long, turned up to see this movie, to see, something that really, to be honest, we've never really seen before. I mean, we've had little glimpses of it, the blaxploitation era, where, you had black heroes. But unfortunately, it kind of went into this thing where the heroes ended up being the pimps and the pushers and things like that, and but not the king of an African country. That's something we never seen being projected onto the screen in a classy way. It was a story that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was a real good story, good protagonist, good antagonist, character development. And this is something I'm going to touch on a little bit later in regards to character development. And his role in the MCU going forward past Endgame. Now, one of the things that we look back on the MCU, we see out of those 22, 23 movies, you get to see these characters evolve. You get to see them go through complete story arcs, not only within their own trilogies, but within whatever number of films a certain character would appear in. You have really where the thing starts with Tony Stark, but you see his progression from that first Iron Man movie all the way to Endgame, where his arc comes full circle. Where instead of being this self-centered playboy, he evolves into caring about what happens with the tech that he's developed. The lives that may have been cost because the wrong people might have gotten a hold of his tech, or who he's selling his tech to, things like that. His role in how to be a superhero or how to be a human being, all of that, whether you go through Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, all of the Avengers movies, Captain America Civil War, that sort of division between him and Steve Rogers. You also have Steve Rogers' story arc from where he started in Captain America First Avenger all the way through at the end of his arc in Endgame, and having to pass the mantle of Captain America to Sam Wilson. And I can go on. You have other characters that, Doctor Strange is still going through development. You have Spider-Man that's going through, particular arc that he'll end up in a different place by the time Tom Holland is done playing Spider-Man. And one of the things that we were also excited about in the MCU was that, Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther was also going to have a significant role going forward in the MCU. So I think where it was Spider-Man, T'Challa, and I think at one point maybe Captain Marvel, but they were going to be central figures. But with the with the loss of Chadwick Boseman, I think that shifted. Maybe some of that character development has now shifted to Doctor Strange. Of course, you see what happened with Spider-Man No Way Home. And then just with how this whole multiverse saga is shaping up or not shaping up, depending on your point of view, it's hard to figure out what's going on next, because it's not just, the loss of Chadwick Boseman that made Marvel say, oh, well, we got to make some changes in how we're going to tell this story. But you've had things like the pandemic that has shifted things around. Now you have the writer's strike, which just ended, but you still have the actor's strike. As of this taping, is still going on. So that's caused them to rethink some things and shift some things around, and how they want to tell this story, and who's going to be the Tony Stark, who's going to be the Steve Rogers, what characters are going to fill those voids that they had to make us care about these next phases going forward with that. So, his absence has really, that absence has really, in a certain way, affected everyone's enjoyment of the current phase of the MCU. I think it's a contributor. And like I said, I think where people forget, like I said, things like the pandemic and the strikes. Kevin Feige being spread too thin because of the upheavals at what's going on with Disney at the moment, or the things that led up to things happening now or not happening, where movies aren't making money like they should now, or what they expected to do, and way too many Disney Plus shows, and all of this is sort of leading to the disappointment of the MCU right now. And it's affected things like even the sequel, Wakanda Forever. Yes, it was well done considering the set of circumstances that they were under. It's very bittersweet as a film. I've watched it once and really haven't tried. Oh, no, I take it back. I think I've watched it a second time, but it's hard to watch because of, like I said, every decision that was made leading up to it, and maybe some of the consequences of some of those decisions. So I don't know, maybe I'll explore that in this episode. Maybe I'll devote an entirely different episode to that. But I wanted to talk about mainly why the character of T'Challa should be recast. And I know when the announcement was made prior to the filming of Wakanda Forever, I get that out of respect for the actor, like at that particular moment, it would have been distasteful to announce a recast. My personal theory is that they've already spent the money to put this thing together. It was scheduled to go in production on a certain time and a certain date, depending on the completion of the script. They probably allowed a little bit more time for Ryan Coogler to kind of tweak the script a little bit to make it turn out the way that it turned out. But my personal feeling is that if it wasn't too late and the checks were already signed and the money was already spent to get this ball rolling, I think it would have been better if they were able to delay that film. Because now we're at a point, so much time has gone by between the pandemic, with the strikes that are going on, and with the strikes and everything, they've had to push their slate. Even before the strikes, they were dissatisfied with some of the writing on some of the films. Some of the films that had been released didn't turn out the way that they wanted. So if a certain writer was tapped to say, do something that was key to the multiverse saga, they would let go and had to get other writers, or something had to be rewritten. So they've had to push their films up several years anyway. So I think now would be the perfect time to just go ahead and recast. I think enough time has gone by to where you can do a recast. But ever since that announcement, it's been this division. People that are like, no, the character should be recast, versus it was Chadwick Boseman's character and it should not be recast. But like I said, I'm going to go into some reasons why he should be. However, I wanted to see kind of the mindset of, especially the people that are so dead set against, oh, he shouldn't be recast, oh, it should be this character, or Shuri should be the whatever. So I was just like, well, the people that are just vocally saying nay to the idea of a recast, are they avid comic book readers? Like, okay, if you're familiar with, his story arc, T'Challa's, or how his character has evolved from 1966 all the way to present day, and the many storylines. His rogues gallery isn't just limited to Killmonger. He's gone head to head against Namor the Submariner, Doctor Doom, and I mean not just physically, but tactically, strategically. And you talk about somebody who's just as, if not more so, effective than one Bruce Wayne, when it comes down to sizing up an enemy and taking them down. To me, I think T'Challa was doing it long before Bruce. I think, where Bruce was just the world's greatest detective. And it wasn't until maybe around the 80s, kind of post Frank Miller, that they elevated him to like this master strategist. Or like even in the 70s, it was like, yeah, he's a master strategist, but they kind of grouped it in with him being the world's greatest detective. Being leader of a country, you're its spiritual leader, you are its governmental, figurehead, you are, the commander-in-chief of the military. So you would have to possess a very strategic mind. You would have to be trained as a warrior, where Bruce basically trained himself, through his travels to be a fighter. But, like I said, the avid comic book readers would know that. They would see the issues where he's gone head-to-head against Dr. Doom, or head-to-head against Namor, or how, he's even top Reed Richards, or both Reed Richards and Tony Stark at one point in time. Reading the comics, you would know that, and why that character, the character, works. So I took a poll a while back, almost a month ago, and I just asked, what is your familiarity with Marvel's Black Panther, aka T'Challa? And the choices were avid comics reader, meaning that, like I said, if, whether you've read every issue from Fantastic Four number 52 and followed every single appearance down to you've read some of the most important story arcs or comic issues, whether it's a Black Panther comic or an Avengers run or Secret Wars or whatever, that you have an avid familiarity with who that character is. Or choice number two, did you just read a comic book or two, and may not know the full story? Or have you only seen T'Challa just by watching the MCU films? And a very overwhelming 72% were avid comic readers. 19% had only watched the MCU films, and then only 9% read a comic book or two. And I think it's mostly that 19% that has only seen T'Challa played by Chadwick Boseman in the MCU, that it's their fundamental belief that he should not be recast just out of plain respect. But one thing I'm going to point out throughout this episode is that the Black Panther, T'Challa, is a character. He's a character. And when you have actors, and I know it's fun to fan cast stuff all the time. I used to do it. I don't do it much anymore. I don't get a enjoyment out of it, because to me, the actor is there to service the character. The character is never there to service the actor. Now, sometimes you get some no-brainers, like Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man. That was a no-brainer casting. I don't know if they had a first choice. I think maybe Tom Cruise or something like that was the first choice. But when I heard the announcement that he was, I was like, that's going to work. Regardless of how the film would have turned out, him playing the role definitely would have worked. Things like Jack Nicholson as the Joker, that was a no-brainer. Back in the old days, we were fan casting stuff. Like, that was a no-brainer. We never imagined Michael Keaton being Batman, but he proved us that he's Batman. But you get those every now and then. It's a no-brainer. Like the thing with Jason Momoa now, like it's like the speculation that he's going to be Lobo. That's a no-brainer. And it's great if you can pay that no-brainer off, if you can get that actor, because you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is going to service that character. He is going to embody that role. And that's what Chadwick Boseman did. He embodied that. In fact, I think he kind of created, or helped create, I think between himself and Ryan Coogler, as the script was being developed, that how he wanted to approach that role. But that was because he knew he was there to service that character, to elevate that character to be just as inspirational on film as he was to a lot of us kids reading comic books back in the day. And I think that's the thing that you need to think about in the decision to recast. But you're going to hear me say that throughout the rest of this episode. It's about the actor servicing the character and not the other way around. So let's go ahead and jump into the 5 reasons why T'Challa should be recast. I'm going to start with number 1. And number 1 is a bit of a no-brainer. Other iconic characters have been recast across all genres for many generations. And we'll start with the big guy. We'll start with Superman. From I think radio came first, and I can't remember who played Superman on radio first. I want to say the name Bud Collyer. That comes to mind. Leave me a comment and let me know if that is correct. But on film, I think the actor's name is Kirk Allen, the very first actor to play Superman, the first, in a set of movie serials from back in the day, and did a wonderful job. I think that was a successful run of theatrical, what do you want to call it, shorts or theatrical series. Back then, where you used to be able to go to the movie. It was like before television, because there really wasn't television in those days. It was invented, but it wasn't like it was in every single household like it was by the 1950s. So you would have these things called serials, where you go to the movies every week, and you might go, and they might have the main feature of a movie. Say like, I don't know, Gone with the Wind or Casablanca or something like that. But before then, you would get like probably a cartoon, or probably like Three Stooges or something. But you would get these things called serials. And Superman had one, Flash Gordon had one, probably Buck Rogers had one, Batman had one, Shazam, the original Captain Marvel, had one back in the day. And you would just go and pay whatever it was, dime, a quarter, and you get to see all of that in one sitting. And the thing with the serials was that you would go every week because it was episodic, so they'd have the hero get into the scrape and get in situation, and then it's like, well, tune in next week. One of probably the biggest tributes to that era of filmmaking would be Star Wars, especially Raiders of the Lost Ark. But Kirk Allen was the first Superman to do that. To embody that character. And then when television came along, then you had George Reeves. And let's look at George Reeves for a minute, because prior to Christopher Reeve, when we were kids, George Reeves was the only Superman we knew, because we never saw the serials. I remember reading a book about Superman and seeing pictures of Kirk Allen being Superman, or a still from one of those films. But even to this day, I've never seen a complete episode of him playing Superman. But George Reeves, that was in our televisions pretty much throughout the 70s. I think even into the 80s, somebody somewhere was showing the adventures of Superman. And they could have kept going. I think there was talk of him still doing episodes of Superman, but died under mysterious circumstances. We don't know if it's suicide, don't know if it's murder, but and stuff like that, because back then actors were more typecast. It was hard for him to get more work because all they kept seeing him was being Superman. And you would think, like in those days, oh, well, we need to recast. Now, back then, if something like that happened and your show was over, regardless, you might have some exceptions with minor characters where, if an actor died in the middle of a TV series, then they would recast that actor or just plain write them off. But, it didn't stop them, nearly 20 years later to bring in Christopher Reeve to play Superman in a major motion picture. This is post Jaws, post Star Wars. So Superman was sort of that next big blockbuster, in this beginning era or golden age of blockbusters. And whether, you enjoyed Superman 1 and 2, which were the best, even if you tolerated Superman 3 or you sat through Superman 4, his embodiment of the character carried through each film to where when he no longer was playing Superman, in the minds of many generations, that's Superman. So, even when he had his accident, you still had, by that time, you had Tom Welling playing Kal-El in Smallville. So they weren't thinking about Christopher Reeve. They let Christopher Reeve come on and do a cameo, playing a professor in that show, but they weren't thinking about his paralysis. They weren't thinking about, like, oh, well, we'll never cast another Superman actor again, out of respect. It was just like, you've done an amazing job, thank you, but hey, we can repay you by, hey, let's bring you on Smallville and play a small role. Things like that. And even when he passed, you had, am I drawing a blank on the actor's name? Superman Returns. That actor basically embodied Christopher Reeve's embodiment of the character. And it still went on. And even though that movie kind of flopped, it didn't stop them from casting Henry Cavill as Superman. So it goes on. And now we have another Superman movie coming out who's just been cast. You have the TV series Superman and Lois. You have the really great cartoon My Adventures of Superman. So when you have a character like that, or Spider-Man, we've had 3 great actors play Peter Parker thus far. And because it's understood that these are actors embodying roles, and that it's the character that we come to see, I enjoyed Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, at least the first 2 films. I really didn't enjoy the third one that much, and I think because of what I understand about the character of Peter Parker, what I've always read in the comics, yeah, he was kind of that nerd, like, oh, why can't things ever go my way? But being Spider-Man kind of gave him an inner confidence that carried him into adulthood. So I felt like as an adult, yeah, he was still having problems and issues and agonizing over whether or not to be Spider-Man or not to be Spider-Man. There was a maturity there. There was something. He wasn't as whiny as he would have been as a teenager. And I thought that was probably the one acting choice that I thought was one of the things that made the third one kind of a disaster for me. I could still watch it better than other films, but again, it's the thing where you had where that one kind of fell off, so they decided to recast, brought in another character, brought in another actor, Andrew Garfield, and then when those movies kind of tanked, then he's back into the MCU, and now you have Tom Holland. But it's what that character means. Superman is just as synonymous with Mickey Mouse as far as global appeal. There's no way you're not going to retire that character. There's no way you're going to bring in, say, Jonathan Kent. Oh, this is Superman's son. There's no way you're going to bring that character in and have him carry a series of films. No, if they do they do a Superman legacy, and within that trilogy, he becomes a parent and things, and you're introduced to a young Jonathan Kent at that point, and if he clicks with the fan base, if he clicks with the movie-going audience, then you will see probably maybe some kind of a spin-off, or they'll try to utilize that character and see if he can carry a film at that point. But there's no way that because George Reeves isn't alive or Christopher Reeve isn't alive, that a character, again, that is synonymous with Mickey Mouse and global appeal, you're not going to see that character diluted. You're not going to see that character. You're not retiring Superman no matter what you think what you do. Same thing with Spider-Man. Yeah, you have two great animated films where it's proven Miles Morales can work, but you got to finish Peter Parker's story before you can introduce a Miles Morales into the equation and maybe have him become Spider-Man. But it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So you need to have that iconic character continue. Probably one of the biggest arguments. Let's talk about whether you're into it or not. Shakespeare, whether it's Macbeth, whether it's Othello, whether it's Much to Do About Nothing. Those are iconic plays, that have the actors from the 1600s all the way through now have embodied, especially, like I said, Macbeth, Othello, Romeo and Juliet. There have been numerous actors. So what if the mindset was, well, that actor that played, Macbeth in, 1682, he died in 1692. We're just not going to recast. We're just not ever going to do Shakespeare ever again. You want to peep Shakespeare, you just going to have to read you're going to have to read Shakespeare. We're going to put it in book form, and you'll just have to read it. So, you fast forward to the age of Hollywood, and again, I'm sure that there's been, I probably can't think of actors from the silent film era or the 1930s or the 1940s. I can tell you, Paul Robeson played Othello way back in the day. Now, you're going to tell me that Lawrence Fishburne should have never played Othello because, there's just no touching Paul Robeson in acting. You're just not going to out-act Paul Robeson. But does that make Lawrence Fishburne any less of a great actor? Come on. No, you don't have that mindset. So why are we having this with a comic book character? Like, okay, well, Chadwick Boseman was the best to ever do it. Yes, he was. But that doesn't mean that there's not somebody else, known or unknown, that could step in and play that iconic character. Again, Shakespeare, Richard Burton, Laurence Olivier. Okay, they're both not walking the planet anymore. So did we stop making plays? You see Shakespeare festivals not continuing out of respect for Laurence Olivier and Richard Burton? No. Come on. No. What was the line? There was it Macbeth that had Denzel Washington in the film? Wasn't he nominated for an Oscar for that? So you're saying that because Laurence Olivier and Richard Burton are dead and can't play Shakespearean characters, where would that have left Patrick Stewart? Because he was all up in the they have a Royal Shakespeare Company where they have actors they train to play Shakespearean roles. And had it not been for that part of his life, there's no Captain Picard. There's no Professor X. But now y'all want to sideline T'Challa? Come on, give me a break. Give me a break. But that's the gist. That's number one. Other iconic characters have been recast across all genres for many generations. Now, number two, the hero's journey of T'Challa is important and inspirational to simply create a derivative Black Panther character. Now, I just touched on that with the previous one. It's, avid comic book readers know that Shuri's role as the Black Panther is finite, or it's limited, and it's not at the expense. There's times when, T'Challa's been exiled, or there's a great one, a great story arc where, Daredevil, Matt Murdock, is out of commission, and he's asked T'Challa to kind of come in and, come into Hell's Kitchen and help keep an eye on things for me while I'm out. And I don't want to give too much of that story arc away. You should read it. Go find it and go read it. And it is one of the best stories about T'Challa you will ever read. Because it's T'Challa without the heart-shaped herb. He has no powers. He's in the middle of Hell's Kitchen fighting crime and has to deal with the Kingpin. And I'll give one little... He handles the Kingpin in a way that would make Bruce Wayne proud. Let's put it that way. Bruce Wayne would be embarrassed to try to tackle the Kingpin. The way T'Challa was many steps ahead in that story arc. But it is an enjoyable read. And I mean, even with that spoiler, it still keeps you on pins and needles, because it's like, he's going to come out on top, but it's like, well, wait a minute, how did he get out of what? And then he was 2 steps ahead. That you have to read it. But and this is just one instance of Shuri being in charge of Wakanda as the Black Panther. While he's in Hell's Kitchen, she's running Wakanda, or she's functioning as the Black Panther. She's got the heart-shaped herb. There's one where there's a story arc where Dr. Doom allegedly has killed T'Challa, and Shuri has to take on the mantle. I think it would be a disservice for those that don't read the comics, that are just going to, because they're familiar with just the MCU films, and they're familiar with Letitia Wright as an actress, and she does a phenomenal job. I don't think that she can fill that void. Like I said, it was what they had to do with Wakanda Forever. They had to do, and it worked. But I really don't think it works, because it's T'Challa that's the character and Shuri is a different character. Let's not say that she can't come in and wreck shop. And I do have some ideas, but I'm going to save that for a different episode, about basically how her role in the MCU can still function and still be great, even when you do recast T'Challa, and especially if you're dealing with Secret Wars. But that's going to be another episode. But again, just to reiterate, you can't just bring Jonathan Kent and like, oh, this is Superman now, and expect people to deal with that, or just deal with it. Like I said, they're starting with Superman Legacy. They have cast a Clark Kent / Kal-El, and you have to tell that story first and foremost, again, because Clark Kent, Kal-El, is just as synonymous, again, as Mickey Mouse or whatever global icon there is, the Beatles or whatever, Elvis or whatever. It's just as synonymous. It's not, I use Elvis as an analogy. Elvis was the icon. Lisa Marie only had a few records, and none of those records made the significant impact that Elvis's records had. Now, I don't know if that was her goal or that was her choice, but to give an example, that's the icon, and then here's kind of like the derivative character. Again, like I said, Miles Morales has proved, at least through animation, that his story can be told. It's an interesting story, and it's, both of those films, Into and Across the Spider-Verse, are probably some of the best Spider-Man movies I have ever seen. But to do live action, like I said, let's get Tom Holland, get him finished in there, and like I said, maybe kind of bring Miles Morales in, and whatever, the 5th or 6th Spider-Man movie, and then again with the Secret Wars, I know they're not going to adapt it totally, but in that comic book, Peter Parker and Miles Morales have a very significant role in that story arc that I would love to see on the screen. But again, that's going to be a different episode. But yes, the hero's journey, the fact where some of the complaints were, oh, he was just weak. T'Challa was just weak in his own movie. Well, T'Challa was only king for like, I guess, a month, since the assassination of T'Chaka in Captain America Civil War. It's just like Man of Steel. It's like, oh, he snapped Zod's neck and he killed somebody. But he was Superman for like a week, barely, if that. And, here come aliens dropping down, like, attacking the earth, trying to get to him. And that's the thing. Even in the comic books, he was the newly crowned king. T'Challa was the newly crowned king. And over the course of 50 plus years, his role was to grow into being king. And that was definitely established in the first film. I remember there's something going around now about how the second film, I wasn't too crazy about this idea where it's T'Challa and Son, they're on an outing, but Namor comes onto the scene, and while it would have been great to see those two face off, like I said again, physically, intellectually, them trading dialogue on philosophy, kind of similar to what you had with T'Challa and Killmonger. Like I said, some of the most iconic and most beloved Black Panther stories revolve around Wakanda's conflict with Atlantis, or in the case of the MCU, Talokan. But that was something that, yeah, I'm sorely going to miss Chadwick Boseman to be able to do that. But that doesn't mean that there's not an actor that can pull off such, again, to use this word, Shakespearean, type dialogue. It's like I say, the action and the special effects and all that's cool, but when you really have great actors, let them do their thing and act. And to see an actor go against another great actor in that type of a role and kind of have that sort of Shakespearean type conflict going on, with the dialogue as well as the action, as well as the special effects. Yeah, while, like I said, I'm going to sorely miss that from Chadwick Boseman, or that it's regrettable that we'll never get that. Again, this doesn't mean that another actor isn't capable of coming in and embodying that iconic role to do that. So yeah, so the hero's journey, or in this case the king's journey, what it means to be king and growing into that role, yeah, that is another definite reason why the role needs to be recast. And number 3, this is something I touched on at the intro, that representation in comics and comic book movies. Those things matter. You see where you kind of have some people up in arms about, say like a movie like Captain Marvel, how it was more of an agenda. And I can agree with that to a point, because the story aspect of it was lost because it was trying to be this inspiration, course, we're not the demographic for this, so I get it. So they're aiming it at a different demographic. Let's aim this at young girls. Okay, fine, cool. But I think they sacrifice the ability to tell a really great story and have that story be universally beloved. Because that was the thing with the Black Panther, that film. It didn't have like this agenda. It was a thing that they went and they told a great story, that was universally accepted. It made $1 billion, so people bought into it and went to go check this out. And you didn't hear all that black backlash that you got with the Captain Marvel film, because to me, I think the Wonder Woman film, the first one, really embodied that. You had a strong female character, you had Themyscira, so you get it. It's like, this is an island full of women, they're powerful, they're in charge, they're doing things, and that's inspirational. And that worked because it wasn't at the expense. They didn't sacrifice the story to get a point across. Wonder Woman has always embodied those ideals since her very first comic book appearance. Where with Captain Marvel, you had a male figure be Captain Marvel for decades that they've killed off in the early 80s. And she was the one to take up the mantle. But again, there's so much backstory and so much story, even with the character of Carol Danvers, that they could have told, that would have worked a lot better, than, like I said, this whole higher, further, faster thing, where they're promoting a slogan. They weren't promoting a good movie or a good story that could have still provided inspiration, but it would have been more organic in that case. So, while representation is key across the board, like I said, you have people up in arms about, there needs to be this and there needs to be that, or why are they focusing on this or focusing on that? You have things like westerns where you've had, I would say this: Hollywood has been able to tell every single story and every single facet for certain segments of people. And for other people, those doors have been closed, or it's harder to get through, or it's harder to get the story, or if you get, like I said, there's a whole bunch of westerns, there's a whole bunch of horror movies, there's a whole bunch of dramas, there's a whole bunch of comedies. Maybe we'll get limited to a comedy, or at one point we were limited to just doing comedies. But there's no action heroes, there's no Western heroes. We're starting to crack the door down with some really great horror movies and things like that. But it's, in other words, for certain segments, they've had a century now to succeed and fail on every single level. And regardless of whether something succeeded or failed, there's never a shortage of people identifying with certain characters and saying, oh, I can aspire to be that, or I want to be that, or that film just made me look good. So that's sorry about that. So that is, where representation is key. We shouldn't just be limited to one segment of representation, like, oh, let's just make crime movies, let's just make these movies about drama, let's just make these movies just about slavery. It's like I said, Hollywood has had every opportunity for over a century to put themselves in the best light and the worst light and every light in between, and the masses have the ability to identify with every single facet of that. And I think every other culture should have that opportunity in Hollywood as well. From everything. Like I said, you need more westerns, you need more science fiction films, more comic book films, more accurately historical films that just don't, not just focus on just slavery. There's a whole history of people long before that, and that have done phenomenal things and inspiring things that could be just as universal. But again, that's another story for another day. But that's number three, that yes, representation in comics and comic book movies should definitely be paramount. And since there aren't that many black superheroes, there's actually a whole lot, many independent companies that produce black superheroes. Hell, I'm on the verge of doing that myself with Amari Comics Universe. I'm about to, launch my own line of superheroes. That, the focus is on the characters, and if it resonates well, then, in time, who knows? Maybe there can be some animation, or television series or films, but it has to be the characters that work. The characters have to resonate with the public with that. But there's so many. But when you're talking about that, you only have the DCU, you only have the MCU, and again, you have every facet of superhero that people can identify with. Then let's not, when you see the ratio of Avengers, let's not sweep T'Challa under the rug. He's just as important as Tony Stark. He's just as important as Steve Rogers. They've shared many adventures together, whether in the Avengers or each other's solo comic. They meet on an equal level. They're intellectually equal. Their technology is whatever it is. Let's not sacrifice that. And I believe that Chadwick Boseman understood the importance of the character, not to want to lose that. He set it up to where, okay, whoever comes in and plays this after me, this is what you need. This is your research. And then if you have a different take that different take. But these are the key things that need to be embodied within this character, and he brilliantly set that up to do. So let's go to number 4. And number 4 is, as dynamic an Avenger as Captain America and Iron Man, T'Challa is actually richer than Bruce Wayne and Tony Stark combined, and is a much better strategist than Bruce Wayne. So these are qualities in a character. I enjoy the character of Sam Wilson, as the Falcon. I know I've read the story arc in which he becomes Captain America long before the Falcon and Winter Soldier TV series. But I still don't know quite how to take that. I guess it kind of goes into derivative character territory. But I guess if there was nowhere else for the character of the Falcon to go, maybe that was the logical progression. But there had always been issues from the very beginning with the character like Sam Wilson. I loved how he is in the MCU, where he's from the military. I probably would have preferred that if he was like part of S.H.I.E.L.D. I would have enjoyed that better, and still had that kind of thing with the technology, with the wings and everything being utilized with him as some kind of S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. But the military aspect works still, because in the comics they didn't really know what to do with his origins. Like, I think at one point, the sad thing about it, that character was a pimp. Then they switched it to being a social worker. It's like, Tony Stark gets to be a billionaire, this cat's a social worker. Nothing wrong with being a social worker. That's something to aspire to be, but, it's positive. But, he started off as a pimp, and then, we try to not to remember that part of it. But they tried to retcon that and said he was like undercover or something like that. But yeah, that's still a very powerful character. But when you get to see, and I'll use maybe not so much as Steve Rogers as Captain America, that's a different thing. But a character like Tony Stark, and a character like Bruce Wayne. Like I said, both billionaires. And I think people, and especially now with the MCU, with Iron Man, Batman and Iron Man are on an equal level in this day and age because of the billionaire status. They both have, futuristic tech. They're kind of futurists in a way. Maybe Stark more than Bruce Wayne. His tech is more practical than it is futurist. But you have, like I said, T'Challa, who from the very inception, is the king of an African country. So based on its gross national product, where Stark and Wayne are pulling in billions, gross national product can go as high as the trillions. That's why I say he's probably, at least on that level, financially superior to both of their wealth combined. Like I said, strategist. Tony Stark in the MCU was a pretty good strategist for the most part. But Bruce Wayne is, I guess, like I said, especially since post Frank Miller, was that, the guy, the archetype of the strategist. But again, look at the issues where T'Challa has dealt with Doctor Doom on numerous occasions. Like I said, not just physical battle, but where they verbal joust, where they're just having a simple meeting, like as two leaders of a country. They're having a state meeting, and it's like the dialogue that's traded back and forth. T'Challa's not weak in that conversation. Like I said, the classic story going toe to toe with the Kingpin and outwitting him, Wilson Fisk at every turn. Those are the things, just like we get excited, like with the previous Batman movie. We finally got to see Bruce be the detective. Well, like I said, my hopes for what should have been Wakanda Forever was to see that character, go toe to toe strategically and verbally as two rulers of a country, share that dialogue. And hopefully with the recast we will get that. So, that's number 4. And then finally, number 5, the actor himself wanted the character to continue. I believe he took that role just as seriously as, say, Christopher Reeve. I think that's the true embodiment. I think Christopher Reeve understood that he was embodying that character, but I think he set it up to where, if, once they bring in somebody to play him afterwards, then that could be just as inspirational, for an actor to want. Again, there are people that aspire to play certain characters in films. And again, probably Shakespearean characters. I don't know if that still hangs today, but, there were people that lived to want to play a Shakespearean role, in whether it was, especially in film, or, an iconic historical figure, or something like that. But when it comes to comic book movies, there was this transition from being typecast to where now you can embody, like with Batman, it's like, okay, well, we've had Michael Keaton, but then, here comes Val Kilmer, here comes George Clooney, here comes Ben Affleck, here comes Robert Pattinson. James Bond is the biggest one. My favorites being Sean Connery and Daniel Craig. But no slight, because I enjoyed Timothy Dalton's. I thought that was a fresh take. I mean, I enjoyed Roger Moore, but over time, the Roger Moore got a little corny to me. So Timothy Dalton was a breath of fresh air to me, embodying the role, because it was more like the books. Daniel Craig, same thing, a little bit closer to the books than the kind of Hollywood presentation of Bond. But Sean Connery is, he's the one that kicked it off, and he's no longer walking the planet. But did they stop and not recast the role when he got tired of it? Like, no, they kept going, and people accept it. Like, people get caught up, just like Batman and Bond. You get caught up in the hype where the internet, like, oh, I hate that. No, not that actor. He's not James Bond. But then the movie comes out and everybody goes and pays their money and they have a good time. And then next time they recast, it's like, oh, he's not like the last actor. No, we love the last actor to do it. So I think he had the wisdom to understand what he was taking on as an actor and handled it with a tremendous amount of responsibility. So while I can probably say not just anybody could recast in that role, but it should go to the one that would probably have that same responsibility towards the character and not write this thing. Because again, it is fun to fan cast, and I see on the internet, and I may get into a few maybe top fives myself, but what about this actor? What about that actor? And I look at it like, well, it depends on what type of direction they're going to take. If it's, if that actor's known for a certain amount of humor, drama ratio, but that's not the tone that they're going for, then I don't care what you say, that actor's not going to work in that role. But if they decide to go with the tone to where that actor is best qualified to fit that tone, then definitely, then again, that actor will service the character, and it will be a perfect fit based on that tone of the story, or where they're trying to go with that character's arc within that story, or trilogy, or whatever, series of films. Yeah. But that's it. What do you think? Are you, part of the recast T'Challa? Like I said, I'm very pro recast T'Challa because, like I said, there's still, that programming of let's just sweep it under the rug, when again Hollywood and comic books has this wide range to succeed and fail, and everything in between continue on with character after character, and we just blindly accept it. May not accept the actor at first, but then we deal with it later. But I get it if you're only familiar with the MCU films and you took that as a sign of respect. I do get that, and you're absolutely right on that one. But like I said, check out a wide range of comic book stories. I know when he did pass, Comixology made available for free at one point every single issue ever printed of the Black Panther. I went and got every single one. And while I don't have a lot of my own original comics from back in the day, like some of the first Avengers comics that I remember first seeing T'Challa in, starting to kind of make up for it with this one. There's another one coming out, another volume coming out next year. But hopefully trying to get as much trade paperbacks as possible. But I do get it. But like I said, check out some stories, or look up like a Marvel database and read about that character's journey. Being a young king and things like that. Like I said, I don't really like the plot of where they introduce the son and he's going to eventually become the Black Panther, especially when they keep delaying it, or they're going to have to do, delay the films and do a time jump within the story to try to shoehorn that in and make that work. I think that was a terrible idea, terrible decision, but there is a way that I think would fit, not only making a recasting of T'Challa fit, but where to introduce that character, when to introduce that character, what film, and how he could still fulfill that role even with a short amount of time without having another film, like a standalone Black Panther movie. But you can introduce him within the MCU. But that's going to be another episode for another time. But until then, what did you think? I know this was kind of a long way to go around it, but these are, it's the first episode, so kind of want to cover as much ground as possible. But what do you think? Are you pro recast, or are you still against the idea of recasting? Leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts, and that will wrap up this episode. But until then, create your day, create your life. Peace.